They thought I was trying to provoke, that I wanted to scandalize, to offend, to destroy. But I wasn't a destroyer. I was a prophet standing in the ruins, pointing to the smoke, screaming that the sky was falling and no one noticed. God is dead, not as a metaphor, not as rebellion, as reality, a truth that had already happened, and no one had the courage to face it. You kept going to church, repeating words that no longer meant anything, clinging to morals you no longer believed. I simply said it out loud. I didn't want applause. I expected horror. Because with the death of God came the death of certainty. No more divine plan, no more absolute truth, no more sacred foundation beneath your feet. Just the cold, infinite freedom of a universe that does not care and dares you to care anyway. That's the weight no one wanted to carry, so they ignored it, distracted themselves, built temples of science, entertainment, ideology. But the silence remained, and under it, the void began to whisper. I saw what was coming, not salvation, not enlightenment, collapse, confusion, the slow unraveling of meaning itself. And yet I didn't despair. I saw possibility in the rubble. I saw man at the brink of transformation, not by returning to old gods, but by becoming something new, something terrifying, something divine, not through faith but through force of will. If I was right, then everything you believe is negotiable. Every value is up for revision. Every truth must be reforged. That's not chaos. That's creation, but only if you dare. Because after the death of God, there is no script, no rescue, only the terrifying question that echoes through every century since. What now? They called me mad. But madness is only clarity that came too early. Clarity the world wasn't ready to face. I didn't kill God. You did, all of you. With your blind obedience, with your hollow prayers, with your rituals stripped of meaning, you turned belief into bureaucracy, faith into convenience, and then you dared to call it sacred. I simply held up a mirror. And when the mirror cracked, you blamed me for the blood. When I wrote God is dead, I wasn't celebrating. I wasn't laughing. I was mourning. The death of God is the death of meaning, the scaffolding that held up Western civilization. For centuries, without that metaphysical sky father watching, suddenly everything trembled. Morality, truth, identity, they all began to rot the moment belief became habit. You were still kneeling, but the altar was empty. You were still preaching, but your words were echoes. People misunderstood me because they wanted to. They thought I was denying divinity. No, I was revealing a corpse, a decaying idol, a once vibrant force now used to justify fear, submission, mediocrity. The death of God wasn't an argument, it was a diagnosis. A prophecy fulfilled not in fire and brimstone, but in indifference, irony, and spiritual boredom. I saw what was coming. I smelled the stench of nihilism before it filled the air. You think the modern world is free? It's unshackled from gods. Yes, but it's chained to emptiness. Progress gave you machines, medicine, metrics, but took away awe. Your gods of efficiency and consumption do not whisper meaning. They only hum. And the hum gets louder every year, drowning out the question. No one wants to ask, what now? I never said it lightly. I never wrote it for applause. God is dead is not a slogan, it's a warning. Because when the old gods fall silent, something else rises to fill the void. And that is where things begin to twist. There was a time when man carved his own laws into stone, when morality rose from instinct, from blood, from the will to power. But then came the priests, the weak, the ones who could not conquer with strength, so they conquered with guilt. They took the raw, chaotic beauty of life and sterilized it. They dressed fear as virtue, called cowardice humility, called resentment righteousness, and the herd believed it. You see, morality, as you know it, was not born out of truth. It was invented, fabricated by those who could not bear the sight of greatness. The nobleman, the warrior, the artist, they terrified the herd. So the herd flipped the script. They told the lion that being a sheep was good, that the whip of obedience was love, that sacrifice meant salvation, and slowly the lion began to kneel. I watched society turn its back on vitality, on excellence, on creation, and they did it in the name of goodness, but it was never about goodness. It was about control, about safety. They built a system where suffering was rewarded and joy was suspect, where saying no to yourself was seen as holy and saying yes to life made you a sinner. They chained the human spirit and praised the chains as sacred. And what's worse, you internalized it. You started to police yourselves. You stopped asking where these values came from or who they served. You just assumed they were eternal, unquestionable, divine, but they were not. They were forged by those who envied strength and masked their envy with morality. That's what I called slave morality, the morality of the weak pretending to be wise. And now that God is dead, those moral lies are starting to flicker. People feel the cracks, they feel the hollowness, but instead of rebuilding from strength, they cling to the corpse. Terrified of freedom, terrified of responsibility. Because once you see through the lie, once you realize morality was never absolute, you're left naked, trembling, and completely free. I never hated Christ. I saw in him a tragic figure, a man of strength surrounded by weakness who became their symbol without choosing to. But what the church built from his name, that was the true crucifixion. Not of one man, but of the human will itself. They didn't just nail flesh to wood. They nailed instinct, joy, sensuality, freedom. The church became a tomb where life was buried under ritual, shame, and denial. They told you suffering was sacred, that to desire was to sin, that to obey was holy, and you believed them, not because it was true, but because it was easier. They offered comfort, certainty, eternity. All you had to do was kneel. All you had to do was kill the parts of yourself that reached too high, the parts that wanted to dance, to burn, to conquer. In exchange, they promised heaven. After death, of course. Never here. The cross is not a symbol of love. It's a symbol of power, and not the kind I admire. It's the power of those who whisper instead of roar, who manipulate instead of act, who call their weakness grace and their fear wisdom. The church didn't lift humanity, it tamed it. Like you tame an animal, by breaking its spirit and giving it treats for being quiet. That's not transcendence, that's domestication, but it worked. Oh, how it worked. Generation after generation, you were taught not to question, not to feel too much, not to want too much. You were given commandments, not questions. Doctrine, not doubt. And in the process, you forgot how to think dangerously, how to live fully. You became good little sheep in a fenced-in meadow and called that safety freedom. And now, with God gone, the fence is cracking. You can smell the wild beyond it, and it terrifies you because the church trained you to fear your own power, your own instincts, your own capacity for becoming more. But that gate is open now. The chains are rusting, and what happens when a people raised in cages suddenly see the sky? They thought they were liberating themselves. They thought the microscope would save them from the mystery, that equations would replace myths, that the cold, clean hands of science would wash away the blood of belief. And in some ways, it did. It tore down the old cathedrals, pixel by pixel. It dissected the soul, labeled it consciousness, and moved on. But in killing God with logic, they forgot to build something in his place. Science gave us tools, not meaning. It gave us facts, but no values. It can tell you how the stars were born, but not why your heart breaks when you look at them. It can measure the chemicals of joy, but not its weight in your soul. And yet people began to worship it, not as a method, but as a new deity. They called it rationality, as if reason could carry the unbearable weight of existence alone. They call me a nihilist, but I only pointed to the true nihilism, the one wrapped in lab coats and jargon, pretending it had everything under control, the one that told you life is random, Love is just biology, and death is nothing. That comforted no one, that built no temples, that offered no resurrection, just silence. A silence so loud it echoes in the heart of every so-called modern man. So now you scroll through data, you quote studies, you trust the science, but late at night, when you're alone, you feel it. That absence, that cosmic shrug, that sense that the universe isn't telling a story anymore. It's just spinning, that your life is not written by gods or fate, but by chance, neurons, and entropy. And what do you do with that? Because when God died, the stars didn't fall, but something inside you did. And science, for all its power, cannot resurrect what you buried. It cannot teach you how to live without gods. It cannot explain how to be human in a world without heaven. When you tear down heaven, you don't just lose God. You lose the ceiling above your soul. And suddenly, there's nothing holding you. No divine plan, no cosmic justice, no final judgment to anchor your choices. You're not suspended between good and evil anymore. You're floating, untethered. That's the abyss I spoke of. Not some hellish pit below, but the infinite emptiness above now that the sky is gone. You feel it, don't you? That subtle dread, that whisper you can't silence, that maybe none of it matters. You chase pleasure, performance, progress, but underneath it all, there's a void you keep trying to outrun. A hunger for meaning that no achievement, no affirmation can satisfy. That's the price of freedom, and no one told you how high it would be. Modern man is drowning in options and starving for purpose. He's told he can be anything, but no one tells him why he should be anything at all, so he numbs himself, disguises despair as distraction, scrolls until his fingers bleed just to avoid sitting in silence, because in the silence, the abyss speaks, and its voice sounds a lot like your own. But I never feared the abyss. I walked into it. I stared into it long enough to see what lies on the other side. Because it's not just emptiness, it's potential. Infinite, terrifying potential. When the old gods fall, something new can rise. If you're willing to face the fall without blinking, most aren't. They cling to the ruins. They call the rubble sacred. But I say, let it burn. Let the old world collapse. Only then can you begin the dangerous work of becoming more than what was handed to you. But make no mistake, that transformation begins not in comfort, not in clarity, but in chaos. People hear nihilism and they recoil, like it's a curse, a darkness to be avoided at all costs. But nihilism is not death, it's birth. It's the fire that burns through the false structures, the shallow beliefs, the borrowed values. It's the necessary collapse before reconstruction, and yes, it hurts. It strips you bare. It devours the illusions you depended on. But in that ruin, there is space. Space to create. You see, most people misunderstand nihilism. They think it means giving up. But no. It means you are finally free to begin, free from the lies, free from the inherited guilt, free from the crutches disguised as commandments. It's the moment when you stop asking what life should be and start deciding what it could be. But this freedom is too heavy for most. So they run back into cages, crying for meaning like children without a mother. When I said God is dead, I knew the next breath would be filled with panic. Because in that vacuum, anything can emerge. Dictators, ideologies, machines, movements, and many did. That's the danger of nihilism. It doesn't stay empty. It gets filled, often with something worse. If you don't create your values, someone else will hand you theirs, and they will call it salvation. But for those who dare, for those who refuse to lie to themselves, nihilism becomes a forge, a crucible, a chance to become your own origin. You must look into the nothing and build something from within. You must will meaning into existence, not find it, not receive it, will it. That is where strength is born, not in blind faith, but in brave creation. So no Nihilism is not the end, it is the door, and those who walk through it trembling, questioning, burning, they are the ones who glimpse the next stage of man. The one who doesn't kneel, the one who doesn't beg, the one who becomes something else entirely. They misunderstood me again. They always do. When I spoke of the Übermensch, the Overman, they imagined tyrants, conquerors, cold, inhuman beasts. But that was their fear speaking, not their reason. The Overman is not a monster. He is a mirror, a reflection of what you could be, if you stopped clinging to what you were told to be. He is the human who has walked through the fire of nihilism and come out forged, not broken. He does not ask for permission to live. He does not inherit his values. He creates them. He does not kneel to ghosts, nor follow blindly the morality of the herd. He carves meaning from the void with his own bare hands. His life is art, battle and dance, all at once. He is not above humanity. He is what humanity becomes when it finally stops apologizing for its power. And no, he is not safe. The Overman is dangerous, not because he destroys, but because he threatens the comfortable illusions. He exposes the lies we tell ourselves about good and evil, about success and failure, about salvation. He stands as a question mark, living, breathing, daring others to look at him and ask, "Why not me?" And most will look away, because the answer is frightening. The Übermensch does not arrive through politics, religion, or revolution. He emerges one soul at a time, from the ashes of meaninglessness, from the refusal to conform. He is not a ruler of others. He is a master of himself. And his existence is proof that man can transcend, not by becoming divine, but by embracing the raw, sacred chaos of being alive. So if you fear him, it may be because you see yourself in him. Not the self you are, but the self you could be if you dared. And that possibility, that unbearable possibility, is the most powerful thing in the world. Imagine this. Every moment you've lived, every breath, every wound, every kiss, every silence will repeat, not once, but forever, over and over in an endless loop. The same birth, the same failures, the same heartbreak, the same laugh at 3 in the morning. Nothing changes, nothing escapes. You must live it all again, exactly as it was. That, my friend, is eternal recurrence, the heaviest thought, the ultimate test. I did not invent this idea to torment you. I offered it as a mirror, a cosmic scale. Could you embrace your life if it meant living it eternally? Not a version you dream of, but the one you've lived, with all its mediocrity, regret, small betrayals, forgotten joys. If you recoil, then perhaps you haven't lived yet, truly lived. The Overman, the one who affirms life, says yes, not just to pleasure, but to pain, not just to success, but to failure. Eternal recurrence is not about the universe. It's about you. It's about how you carry your choices, your days, your minutes. Would you love them enough to endure them forever? Or would you curse them, erase them, beg for escape? This thought divides those who merely exist from those who become. It demands radical responsibility, no excuses, no outside force to blame, no redemption arc waiting after death. I offered no heaven, no hell, only the chance to live so fiercely that you'd choose it again, not because it was perfect, but because it was yours, because you dared to shape it with your own will. That is the measure of a free spirit, one who creates a life worthy of recurrence, who dances even when the music is cruel. And if you can't say yes to that eternal return, then maybe it's time to change how you live before the next cycle begins. If I was right, and God is truly dead, then everything you thought was solid is now liquid. The ground beneath your values, your institutions, your identity, it's dissolving. There is no divine map anymore, no commandments carved in stone, only the abyss, only your hands, only your will. And that is both terrifying and beautiful, because now, for the first time, you must choose who you are, without anyone to absolve you. But here's the twist. Most don't want that freedom. They beg for new gods, political ideologies, technological saviors, false prophets wrapped in algorithms. They want structure without spirit, purpose without pain, but every replacement idol will crumble, just like the last. Because the death of God wasn't just about religion, it was about the collapse of inherited meaning itself. What comes after isn't certainty, it's creation, not obedience but authorship. The age of the divine is over. Now begins the age of the Creator, not a celestial one, but you. You must become the source of values, of purpose, of direction. You must stare into the nothing and will something into being. That is the new sacred act. That is the next evolution of man. But make no mistake, this is not for the faint-hearted. It requires that you die to who you were, the follower, the believer, the child, and be reborn as something dangerous, something honest, something unchained. That is what I foresaw, not the end of meaning, but its rebirth through fire. So if I was right, then you are standing at the edge of history. The gods are dead. The throne is empty. The crown is yours, if you dare wear it. If one day you find yourself standing in front of the void, no gods, no rules, no meaning handed to you, remember this: the throne is empty, and that is not a tragedy. It's an invitation. Drop this in the comments. The crown is yours, if you dare wear it.